Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, wherever you find your podcast. Today is a special Protecting the Planet with Your Kids edition of the show. Our guest is Nancy Castaldo. She is here to celebrate When the World Runs Dry, Earth's Water in Crisis. Before we invite Nancy into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by I'm a Gluten-Sniffing Service Dog by Michael Babé. Do you love books about dogs, friendship, food? Meet Chewy, the goofiest gluten-sniffing dog in town. This is a wonderful book that is based on Michelle's personal experience with her daughter's celiac journey. With back matter chock full of gluten-free kibbles and tips, readers can increase their knowledge about the autoimmune disease known as celiac. This book is sure to warm your heart and give you gluten-free giggles. We love it. I'm a Gluten-Sniffing Service Dog by Michael Babé. Join us right now from the beautiful state of New York. Our guest today is here to talk to us about something that's really, really important, a little bit scary, but hopefully she's going to show us that there's hope. Please welcome to the show the author of When the World Runs Dry, Earth's Water in Crisis, Nancy Castaldo. Hey, Nancy, how are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm so happy to be here and talk to your listeners.
I'm really happy that you're here. Would be happier, though, if we didn't have to talk about the Earth's waters being in crisis.
I would be too. But there is hope at the other end of the tunnel.
Good. So I'll be honest. I first heard, now I mentioned many times, I'm almost 100 years old. I first heard that there was a threat to our water. And it was hard for me to comprehend back when I was in college decades ago. And, you know, just the science teacher, and I wasn't a science guy, but the science teacher was telling us, hey, it looks like we have water all around us. We live in Boston. We're right next to the ocean, but our groundwater is drying up, and the groundwater that's there is getting polluted, and we really need to get us. So people have been talking about this for a long time.
It has been, and it's been a topic of interest and concern for decades. I think that climate change and the awareness have brought other issues to bear on the water crisis at this point. I think that years ago, a lot of the messaging was focused around pollution, which is still a major concern, but now we have added concerns around it. We have more droughts, more flooding, more sea level rise, and all of these things have damaged the quality and the quantity of our water supplies around the world. And it's one of those concerns that needs to be addressed rather quickly to move forward and to ensure that we have enough clean water for our growing population.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, one of the things that just boggled my mind, this past summer, here in the Boston area, it seemed like it rained every day from July until at least the end of October, and it's still raining a lot. I mean, it's raining right now here in Boston. And at the same time, when we're getting all this rain, and thankfully not flooding, but we're getting all this rain, people on the West Coast are experiencing terrible drought. And I'm thinking to myself, why in the world can't we get the water that's here over? We have these pipelines that gets oil to, across the continent. Why can't we do that with water?
Well, that's a good question. And of course, it brings to bear a lot of other concerns about pipelines and things and running them. And we always have to look at the other factor of like climate versus weather, and that the weather changes. And when that water is coming down, say in Boston, where is it going? Is it landing on the earth and seeping down into our groundwater? Or is it landing on pavement and rushing out via drains and whatnot into then the ocean? What is happening to that water when it actually lands? So when you start talking about those pipelines and things that are pipe dreams, should I say? How would we do that? How would we focus that water into a spot to be able to even channel it into other directions? In the West, there is something a little bit like that when you look at the Colorado River, and you have water that falls in the river and snowmelt that comes into that river, and then that river water is piped out into different areas of the West. It goes all the way to Tucson, Arizona, and many different areas. In fact, I think 6 or 7 states I mentioned in the book use the water from that river. So that's a situation where you do have water that comes from the sky, so to speak, that does end up being then funneled to other places. But it is frustrating sometimes when you see that there's so much flooding in one area and so much dryness in another area. And that's because our world is a bit out of balance at this point. And that's what's happened.
So one of the things we want to do here on the program is to give parents the information they need so they can talk to their kids about climate change and in a way that's not terrifying for them. So what are the most important things that a parent should be talking to kids about when it comes to water and the current crisis that you're so concerned about and that we all should be concerned about?
Well, everybody has the ability to make a difference. And that's what I really wanted to do in this book, is show that there are these things that are happening around the world. And we can't control all of what's happening around the world, but we can make a difference in our communities. We can make a difference in our own homes. And I'm hoping that this book brings people to the forefront of wanting to act. As a matter of fact, Audubon magazine just printed a review of it that I read today that said, this is the book to read if you want to go from depressed to fired up and ready for action. And I'm hoping that does that. So when I'm talking to families, the first thing that I would say is let's explore where your water comes from. Ooh. Where does the water come from in your own home? Does your water come from municipal water supply that is coming from a different area and is being piped, so to speak, into your home? That's happening in most large communities, urban centers. Or is your water supply coming in from a well? Are you using a pump in your own home to draw up water from a personal well? And that's a great exploration right there, is to see the source of your water. Let's go out and find it. Let's go see where that water supply is. Let's investigate and explore the source of our own water. Once we do that, then we can explore the quality of our own water in our own home. What can impact that water supply? So is the water that is coming into your home, is it being cleaned at a water treatment facility? Maybe even drive past the water treatment facility and see where that happens with a young family. Or conduct a little water test in your own home. You can do that with a simple water testing kit that you would do for your pool, or you can go to get an actual water testing kit that can see what the breakdown is of the water in your home. if there's bacteria, if there's nitrogen, if there's added levels of anything. That's a great way to investigate right there. The next thing that can be done in your own home is to try to figure out how much water do you use during the day. I have spoken to school groups, and I challenge the kids to see if they could fill a 1 gallon or a half gallon, a big milk jug, with water for the day, and see if you could get by one day with just using the water in that jug. How much can actually be used for teeth washing, for hand washing, for drinking, for flushing your toilet. And it's surprising to find how much we actually do use and how much we could possibly reduce into limiting our usage during the day into that smaller amount. Then, if you're using the book with these examples, with these activities, you can look at the chapter that focuses on South Africa, when the people in that community were facing day zero, which was a day that was believed to be the cutoff day that they wouldn't have any more water in Cape Town, and the entire community had to come together to use less water, and they were allocated a certain amount. So maybe comparing that amount to how much you actually use during the day and finding the equivalent. And then, of course, there's a lot of other actions that you can take in your own home and in your communities to conserve more water, to keep your water clean, to watch what actually is flushed down the drain in your own home, to be conscious of that, because everything that we flush down the drain, whether we're taking a shower or we're using a washing machine or the toilet or the sink, it's going to go somewhere. So everything that we flush goes somewhere. And some of that does end up in our water supply unknowingly. If we're washing our hair with shampoos and other things, some of those chemicals actually stay in our water supply and actually end up as something that might come around again. And I talk about that in the book as well, of things that are in water supplies all over that don't necessarily are not cleaned out in water treatment or the layers. So it can get a little frightening when you start to think about all the things, but then you can change your habits and you can watch what you put into the drain, and you can watch what behaviors that you can modify that are pretty simple in some cases to do to keep our water supply cleaner and watch what is going down.
You know, there's so many great ideas. The idea of taking the time to become aware of where your water is coming from and to understand, especially if you're in a large city like Boston, like New York, where we have these giant reservoirs that are supplying the water supply, and the reservoirs aren't anywhere near the city. They're 40, 50 miles out and maybe a little bit further in the case of New York City. But we never think of that. You know, when you ask a kid, where does water come from? It's I go in the bathroom, turn this thing on, it's always there. You never appreciate that until it's not there. I've had a tour. I've toured Puerto Rico performing my educational magic show many times, and they've experienced lots of droughts down in the area where the water would be on one day and it would be off the next day. And the people were able to survive, but it was a challenge. We had a giant water main break here in Boston where the entire metro area was without water for a day. And that was like Armageddon. You know, folks really freaked out. You
don't miss something until you lose it. And that's the case.
Yeah. So I think that whole idea of understanding where your water comes from is very, very important.
And I think it's something that we should all be aware of. It's a natural resource that we use every day, and we need to use it. So why not be aware of where it comes from, and how we're managing it? And I think that's that's key about so much of our planet. If we're just more aware, then we can change our behaviors to make a difference. And everybody has the ability to make a difference. It doesn't matter where you live. We all have the ability to make these little changes that can impact not only you in your own home, but a wider community.
Now, is the biggest challenge when it comes to, say, drinking water, the fact that there's so many more people living together in these large, giant cities?
I think that the drinking water aspect is not solely impacted by people in cities, because although the majority of people do live in urban areas, we, like you're saying, are getting water from so many different areas. And sometimes we're getting water from someplace that's 40 miles or 50 miles away from where we're actually living. So the water that's being impacted is running underneath our earth in many, many cases. It's our groundwater. And what we do on top of the water is going to sometimes impact the cleanliness of our water. So even if I'm living in a home that has a well, that doesn't mean that because I am not in a big city, I'm not impacted. The water that's in my well that's coming up from the aquifer can be polluted, as in case of the PFAS in Hoosick, New York, and in other communities in Michigan and throughout our country now that are having pollution problems underneath the earth. So we're always used to thinking about pollution that we can see in a lake or in the ocean. We see plastic floating in the ocean, or we see trash along a lake. We sometimes don't think about the pollution that goes on underneath our feet in the water resources that are underneath our feet. So the water all around us and underneath us is impacted no matter where we live.
Yeah. One of the things you were talking about is asking kids to just become aware of how much water they use by starting the day with a big gallon jug. I was sharing with Nancy earlier an adventure that I had in the Adirondacks of New York on a camping trip. And one of the other things about that particular camping trip that I remember was that we were staying in a pretty primitive campsite. And one of my chores every morning was to go and walk about a mile with a giant 5-gallon jug of water and fill it up and then bring it back to the campground for us to use during the day. And I remember that was one of the most miserable things I had to do, because a 5-gallon jug of water is awfully heavy when you're carrying it for a mile. But there are people who are living like this all over the world, where they have to get and walk not only a mile, it might be 2, 3, 4, 5 miles a day to the only clean source of water. And sometimes those sources of water aren't so clean.
Exactly. And sometimes they're walking 3 miles to get the water and then 3 miles back from getting the water. And most of those people are children or women. And that is happening in many countries that don't have adequate water supplies where they live near them. They don't have the wells dug. There's groups that families can donate to that can help do well drilling in those areas. But we don't have to look so far for some of those families either. Those families also are in the United States, in our country. 40% of the Navajo reservation have no running water, and they have water that is trucked in and brought into them. So this is not a problem that we always say is across in another country or across the ocean in a faraway place. There's people near us that don't have water. So it's a problem of sometimes not just not having water underneath them, but not having the means to access that water, to access those, have a well or have it piped in.
Right. So I love this. So we're talking to kids about becoming aware where their water is coming from. helping kids understand how much they use during the day and finding ways that they can use less. If we here in Boston, New York, if we're using less, does that mean that there's going to be more for folks in other parts of the country that don't have it?
Yes. Yeah. If we're conserving water, that's going to help the entire world. So there's so many ways that we can use less water, and it's not always just the fact of turning on the tap less, of turning your faucet on less. Sometimes it's what is being aware of how many things that you use during the day that also use water. So, for example, if you are a person that loves to have new clothes and loves to go out and buy lots and lots of clothing and shop for clothes, and you're able to do that, the clothing industry uses a lot of water. I'm wearing a pair of jeans right now. My jeans are made of cotton, and the cotton is one of the thirstiest crops on the planet. So a lot of water went into not only growing the fiber for my jeans, but also in the dyeing process of my jeans. The same thing with t-shirts, cotton t-shirts. And so there's ways of reducing water in all of the factors. So if my jeans are produced in California, say, for example, or wherever the cotton is grown, where is the water coming from to grow that cotton crop? Mm-hmm. Or drinking almond milk, which I will confess, it's something I love. I love almond milk, but a lot of water has to go into creating a container of almond milk. So it's being aware of the choices that we make during the day, and perhaps buying less clothing, or maybe swapping with a friend, having recycling clothing, so that not as much water has to be put into that process that is overall impacting the entire globe.
Yeah.
Because all of these things make a difference.
Yeah. So maybe we all don't need 15 or 20 pairs of jeans.
Right. And we don't probably have to wash them as much as we might. Maybe we can wash them a little less and use less water, or use energy efficient dishwashers and washing machines that use less water or less energy, because all of that is part of the water crisis that we're having. Mm-hmm. Water is also used in the energy making process. So when we're fracking for natural gas or oil, or we're digging coal, all of that industry to produce the power that we use also uses water, or water is contaminated by those processes. So by using less energy, we also can help our water supply around the world. Yeah. So it's like a web. There's multifaceted ways, but that's the good thing. Even though we're living in the human age, and that we have the unfortunate ability of making these things happen, we also have the ability to make a difference, to stem climate change, to use less water. We have some control over those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that that's a great way for a family to have an ongoing discussion. And I really hope that folks are listening to this think about that as they're sitting down and talking to their kids. So many, and I think one of the flaws that I see happening in a lot of schools is they'll do this big campaign, and March is Read Aloud Month, and so we're going to talk about reading aloud in March, and then we're not going to talk about it again. Or we're going to talk about healthy choices in April, and then that's it. It needs to be an ongoing, and I think that talking about water, how we can conserve it, how we can change our behavior so less is used, that can be something that we can talk about on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, just sharing and and just helping our kids understand that we all are empowered and we have the power to save and protect this beautiful planet of ours.
Exactly. And, I think that's the great takeaway is that, we all can make a difference with our decisions and our behaviors. And if those decisions and behaviors become habit, we all can benefit from them.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the habits that folks are going to want to create in their lives is to go and find out where they can find out more information about this issue. And a great place to start would be maybe your website. Do you have a website folks can visit?
I do have a website, and come January, it's actually going to be updated. But there is some information on there now about my books, about my other books. And there will be a lot more once this book comes out. There'll be additional resources there in January and going forward.
Great.
Yes. And in the back of the book, there are also a lot of resources in the back matter that families can turn to with websites and other books to read and videos that they can also watch together.
Wonderful. So let's tell everybody your web address.
It is NancyCastaldo.com.
Awesome. Real easy. We've been talking to the author of When the World Runs Dry, Earth's Water in Crisis, and we've been speaking to the author, Nancy Castaldo. Hey, Nancy, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that everybody goes out and gets inspired to do a little bit in their area.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Matt Forrest Essenwine. He'll be here to celebrate I Am Today. It's a really fascinating conversation. You're going to be blown away, especially if you are an author. Speaking of authors, if you are an author, please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page because we want to help you let the world know about your fantastic book. We'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy. It doesn't cost a thing, and it gives you a chance to tell thousands of people about your book. We would love for you to submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel, and if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. We'll celebrate your book on our Certified Great Read Hall of Fame and give you a number of tools that can really let families know that your book is worthy of their consideration. And our monthly promotion program is insane. What a great value. We'll celebrate your book through commercials on the podcast, through messages to our 66,000 social media followers, and display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. It is a fantastic value. Learn all about these services and more by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. I want to start by thanking our guest, Nancy Castaldo. Please be sure to check out When the World Runs Dry, Earth's Water in Crisis. Also want to thank our sponsor, Michelle Bebe, and her wonderful book, I'm a Gluten-Sniffing Service Dog. I want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you, because you are a superstar. You've been doing so much for your kids over the past few years. You deserve a medal. You absolutely deserve a hug. Please consider this a great big virtual hug. Can't wait for us to be able to hug each other in person. Until then, I'll be looking for you in the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.